The bag was already packed before the moon reached its highest point. Elena Voss stood at the edge of the training field, watching the lights in the main house go dark one by one. 9 years. She had given 9 years of her life to a man who did not know the sound of her laugh. Tonight, that ended. She moved quickly across the wet grass, her boots silent on the ground she had walked 1,000 times before. The pack house rose behind her, tall and cold under the night sky, its windows like closed eyes. Somewhere inside, Alpha Draven Ashworth was probably still awake, going over reports, unaware that the woman who had kept his entire world running smoothly was about to vanish from it completely. Elena did not look back at the house. She had promised herself that much. Looking back had never done her any good before, and it would not do her any good now. At the tree line, her best friend Mira Bennett waited with a second bag slung over one shoulder. Mira's eyes were red from crying, though she tried to hide it behind a brave smile. "You do not have to do this alone," Mira said. "I could come with you." "You have a life here," Elena said. "A mate, a future. I will not take that from you." "And what about your future?" Mira asked, her voice sharp with worry. "You have spent 9 years waiting for a man who cannot even remember your last name half the time. Elena, you deserve so much more than this." Elena's throat tightened, but she did not let the tears fall. She had cried enough over Draven Ashworth to fill a river. Tonight was not for crying. Tonight was for walking away with her head high. "I know what I deserve," Elena said quietly. "I am finally going to go find it." She thought of the years behind her, stacked one on top of the other like stones in a wall she had built around her own heart. She had come to this pack as a frightened 17-year-old girl, newly orphaned, with nothing but a small bag of clothes and a healing gift she barely understood. Grace Doyle, the pack's head healer, had taken her in without question, training her in the old ways of herbs and bone setting, and the quiet magic that lived in gentle hands. It was in those early days that Elena first saw Draven Ashworth. He was 20 years old then, already carrying the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders after his father's sudden death. He moved through the pack house like a storm contained in human skin, all sharp orders and colder silences. Elena remembered the exact moment their eyes met for the first time. She had been carrying a tray of bandages down the east corridor, and he had walked past her without a single glance, already shouting instructions to Owen Hale, his beta. She had told herself it did not matter. He was the alpha. She was nobody. That should have been the end of it. But her wolf had other ideas. From that first meeting, something inside her had recognized something inside him, a pull she could not explain and did not want. She had spent years pretending it was nothing more than admiration, the natural respect a pack member owes its leader. She told herself this lie so many times that she almost believed it. Almost. Now, standing at the edge of the territory she had called home for 9 years, Elena finally let herself admit the truth. She loved Draven Ashworth. She had loved him since she was 17 years old, and she had never once told him. Not when he found her in the healing room at midnight, exhausted from tending to injured warriors after a border skirmish, and simply said, "You work too hard," before walking away without waiting for a reply. Not when she quietly stitched the gash on his shoulder after a fight with a rival pack, her hands steady even as her heart pounded, and he barely thanked her before storming off to deal with the next crisis. Not on the night of his 25th birthday, when the entire pack gathered to celebrate, and he never once noticed that the healer who had been treating his wounds for years, the same woman who had memorized his allergies and his sleeping habits, and the exact way he liked his tea, was standing quietly in the corner, watching him laugh with women who barely knew his name. She had told herself, year after year, that someday he would see her. Someday he would look past the quiet healer's apprentice and notice the woman who had been loving him faithfully in silence. She had waited through his string of shallow romances, through his growing distance from anyone who tried to get close, through the slow hardening of a heart that had once, perhaps, been softer. She had waited until 3 days ago, when she overheard him speaking to Owen Hale in the corridor outside the healing room. "Who handles the herb inventory now?" Draven had asked, his voice distracted, already moving on to the next topic before Owen could answer. "Elena does," Owen had said. "She has done it for years." "Elena," Draven repeated, as though testing an unfamiliar word. Right. That single moment had broken something inside her, that 9 years of silence had never managed to break. He did not know her. After 9 years of devotion, after countless nights spent healing his wounds and organizing his pack's medical needs and loving him from a distance so respectful it had cost her everything, he still did not truly know her name. That night, Elena had gone back to her small room above the healing house and cried until she had no tears left. And when the crying stopped, something new had taken its place. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and more final than anger. A decision. She was done waiting. Now, standing at the tree line with Mira beside her, Elena felt that decision settle into her bones like something solid and unshakable. "I have to go," she told Mira. "If I stay one more day, I do not think I will ever leave. I will keep telling myself that tomorrow will be different, that tomorrow he will finally see me, and tomorrow will never come. Mira, I have waited 9 years for a tomorrow that does not exist." Mira pulled her into a tight hug. "Where will you go?" "North," Elena said. "There is a pack near the coast that has been asking for a trained healer. I sent word to them last week. They said I could come whenever I was ready." "And are you ready?" Elena looked back, just once, at the dark shape of the pack house against the night sky. Somewhere in there, Draven Ashworth was sleeping, or working, or doing whatever it was he did in the hours she used to spend awake, worrying about whether he had eaten dinner, whether his old shoulder injury was acting up in the cold weather, whether he was lonely in that enormous house, even though he never let anyone close enough to know. She would not worry about those things anymore. Starting tonight, that was no longer her responsibility. "I am ready," Elena said, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she believed it. She hugged Mira one more time, memorizing the warmth of her closest friend, the only person in this pack who had truly seen her over the years. Then she turned and walked into the dark forest, her bag on her shoulder and her heart, for the first time in 9 years, belonging fully to herself. The journey north would take 3 days on foot, cutting through unclaimed territory where no pack held authority. Elena had made the trip in her mind 100 times over the past week, planning each stop, each safe clearing to rest. She was a healer, not a warrior, but 9 years in a pack that valued strength had taught her enough to survive alone in the wild. As dawn broke over the trees, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, Elena allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate, aching hope she had carried for Draven Ashworth, the kind of hope that slowly poisoned itself the longer it went unanswered. This was different. This was hope for herself, for a future she would build with her own hands, in a place where someone might actually see her. She thought of Cale Nordstrom, the alpha of the coastal pack, whose messages over the past week had been warm and welcoming, in a way that felt almost foreign to her. He had written that his pack desperately needed a healer of her skill, that they had heard of her work from traveling merchants who spoke highly of her gentle hands and sharp mind. He had asked thoughtful questions about her preferences, her needs, whether she would be comfortable in a smaller pack house near the water. No one in 9 years with Draven Ashworth had ever asked her such questions. By midday, Elena stopped at a stream to rest and eat the small meal she had packed. She sat on a smooth rock, letting the sound of running water fill the silence around her. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel lonely. It felt peaceful. She thought about Grace Doyle, who had trained her, and would surely be upset to lose her apprentice so suddenly. She had left a letter explaining everything, tucked beneath the herb ledger where Grace would find it in the morning. She thought about the other pack members who had become like family over the years, people who had never quite understood why she stayed so devoted to a man who barely acknowledged her existence. Most of all, she thought about herself, about the girl who had arrived 9 years ago with nothing, and the woman who was walking away now with everything that truly mattered, her skills, her strength, her dignity. As the sun began its slow descent behind the trees, Elena rose from the rock and continued north, each step carrying her further from the only home she had known, and closer to a future she was only beginning to imagine. She did not look back again. She had already given that pack, and that alpha, more than enough of her life. Behind her, though she could not have known it yet, the pack house was about to feel her absence in ways no one had expected, and somewhere in that quiet, cold house, a man who had never truly seen her was going to wake up tomorrow morning and discover that everything he had taken for granted had simply walked away in the night. For now, though, Elena Voss walked north beneath a brightening sky, and for the first time in 9 long years, she walked toward something, instead of waiting for someone. The forest thinned as evening approached, giving way to rolling hills that marked the edge of contested territory. Elena found a hollow between 2 large stones, sheltered from the wind, and settled in for her first night alone in the wild. She built a small fire, more for comfort than warmth, and watched the flames dance while her mind wandered back through the years she was leaving behind. She remembered the day Draven had returned from a diplomatic trip to the Eastern Pax, injured in a skirmish no one had warned her about. She had worked through the night to save his arm, her hands steady despite her exhaustion, despite the fear that gripped her chest the entire time. When he finally woke, groggy and pale, his first words had not been of thanks but of business, asking whether the Eastern Alliance would hold. She had answered his questions calmly, professionally, while inside her heart had been breaking just a little more. She remembered the quiet nights spent organizing the healing house long after everyone else had gone to sleep, finding a strange comfort in the solitary work, telling herself it was dedication to her craft, when really, it was avoidance of a truth she was not ready to face. She remembered watching him from a distance at pack gatherings, always present but never seen, a shadow at the edge of his world. 9 years of almost being noticed, almost being thanked properly, almost being seen as more than the woman who fixed broken bones and mixed healing herbs. The fire crackled and popped, sending small sparks into the darkening sky. Elena pulled her knees to her chest and let herself finally grieve, not for what she was losing, but for the years she had spent hoping for something that was never going to come. She grieved for the 17-year-old girl, who had first fallen for a boy, who would grow into a man too closed off to notice love, standing right in front of him. But grief, she was learning, did not have to last forever. As the fire burned low, and sleep finally began to claim her, Elena Voss felt something new settle into place inside her chest. Not the absence of love exactly, but the presence of hope. Hope for a life where she would not have to wait in silence for someone to finally look her way. Tomorrow, she would continue north. Tomorrow, she would take another step toward a future entirely her own. And somewhere behind her, in a pack house that had never truly appreciated her, the consequences of 9 years of blindness were about to begin. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in longer than she could remember, slept without dreaming of Draven Ashworth at all. The following morning, Elena woke to birdsong and the smell of damp earth. She packed her small camp quickly, eager to cover as much ground as possible before the heat of the day set in. As she walked, her thoughts drifted less and less to the pack she had left behind, and more to the pack she was walking toward. Cale Nordstrom's messages had mentioned a small healing house near the cliffs overlooking the ocean, a place where she would have her own space to work, her own authority over the pack's medical needs, not simply serving as an apprentice under someone else's guidance for the rest of her life. The thought of true independence, of being valued for her skills, rather than overlooked despite them, filled her with a quiet excitement she had almost forgotten she was capable of feeling. By late afternoon, Elena crossed into the neutral lands that separated Draven's territory from the coastal pack's borders. She felt the shift immediately, a lightness in the air that she chose to believe was more than just her imagination. She was truly leaving, truly starting over. As the sun set behind her, casting long shadows across the hills, Elena allowed herself one final thought of the man she was leaving behind. She hoped, somewhere deep down, that he would be well. That his pack would continue to thrive under his leadership, that someday, perhaps, he would learn to see the people around him more clearly than he had seen her. But that hope was no longer her responsibility to carry. She had carried it for 9 years, and it had cost her more than she would ever get back. Tonight, she set it down for good, and walked on toward the coast, toward Cale Nordstrom's pack, toward a life where she intended to be seen. 2 days later, Elena crested the final hill separating her from the coastal territory, and looked out over waters she had never seen before, glittering silver and gold under the afternoon sun. Somewhere down there, a new life was waiting for her, one she intended to build with her own 2 hands, without waiting for anyone else's permission to be happy. She took a deep breath of salt air, straightened her shoulders, and began the walk down toward the coast, toward whatever came next. Behind her, far to the south, Alpha Draven Ashworth was about to discover that his world had quietly fallen apart, and he had no one to blame but his own blindness for not seeing it coming. Owen Hale noticed the silence first. It was a Tuesday morning, and the healing house, which should have been humming with the quiet sounds of Elena grinding herbs and organizing supplies, was completely empty. The shelves that had always been perfectly stocked looked untouched from the day before. No fire in the small stove. No kettle warming water for the morning tea she made for the elderly pack members who came in with aching joints. Owen stood in the doorway for a long moment, an uneasy feeling settling in his stomach. He was Draven's beta, a man trained to notice when things were wrong before they became disasters, and something about this stillness felt very wrong indeed. He found Grace Doyle in her private quarters above the healing house, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. On the small table in front of her sat a single folded letter. "She is gone," Grace said, before Owen could ask. "Elena left last night. She is not coming back." The words hit Owen harder than he expected. He had known Elena for years, had watched her work tirelessly for this pack without ever asking for recognition or reward. He had always assumed she would simply always be there, a fixed and reliable part of pack life, the way the sun rose each morning, without anyone questioning it. "Where did she go?" he asked. Grace shook her head. She did not say exactly, only that she found a place where she would be valued, a place where someone finally asked her what she needed, instead of only ever taking from her. Owen sat down heavily in the chair across from Grace, running a hand through his hair. He thought of all the times he had seen Elena working late into the night, healing warriors who barely thanked her, organizing supplies that Draven never once acknowledged. He had always assumed she stayed out of loyalty to the pack, or perhaps simple dedication to her craft. He had never once considered that she might have been waiting for something more, something that never came. "Does Draven know?" Owen asked quietly. "Not yet," Grace said. "I imagine he will find out soon enough, when the herb inventory is not restocked, and the healing schedules fall apart without her keeping track of everything. He has never noticed the work she did. I doubt he will notice its absence quickly either." Owen left Grace's quarters with a heavy heart, unsure exactly how to break the news to his alpha. Draven Ashworth was not a man who handled surprises well, and this particular surprise was likely to unsettle him more than he would ever admit out loud. He found Draven in the main hall, reviewing reports from the Border Patrol, with his usual sharp focus, entirely unaware that his world had shifted overnight. Draven looked up as Owen approached, his expression already shifting into business mode. "What is it?" Draven asked. "You have that look." "Elena is gone," Owen said, deciding there was no gentle way to deliver the news. "She left the pack last night. Grace says she is not coming back." For a moment, Draven's expression did not change at all. He simply stared at Owen, as though processing words in an unfamiliar language. "Elena," he repeated slowly, "the healer's apprentice. She has been the pack's primary healer for the last 3 years. Actually," Owen said, unable to keep a slight edge out of his voice, "Grace mostly oversees the herb garden and trains new healers now. Elena has been running the healing house on her own for some time." Something flickered across Draven's face, an emotion Owen could not quite name. Confusion, perhaps, or the beginning of an uncomfortable realization. Why would she leave? Owen chose his words carefully. "I do not know the full story, but I imagine 9 years of being taken for granted might have something to do with it." Draven's jaw tightened at that, a flash of irritation crossing his features. "I never took her for granted. She had a place here, steady work, a home." "A place," Owen repeated, "but did anyone ever ask her if that place made her happy? Did you ever ask her name before last week?" The question hung heavy in the air between them. Draven opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently unable to find a defense against the accusation. He had always prided himself on knowing every important detail about his pack, every alliance, every threat, every strategic advantage. But he realized now, with an unpleasant jolt, that he genuinely could not remember the last time he had spoken to Elena about anything beyond the immediate needs of an injury. "The herb inventory," Draven said slowly, almost to himself. "The healing schedules. Who will manage all of that now?" "That is what you are thinking about?" Owen asked, incredulous. "A woman just left this pack after 9 years of loyal service, and your first concern is the herb inventory?" Draven's expression darkened. What would you have me think about instead? Owen shook his head, frustration evident in every line of his posture. Perhaps whether she left because this pack failed her, because you failed her. The words landed like a physical blow. Draven stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. I have led this pack faithfully since my father's death. I have kept us safe, kept us strong. I do not fail my people. Not the pack as a whole, perhaps, Owen said, standing his ground despite his alpha's obvious anger. But individual people, Draven, people who worked in your shadow for years, without ever receiving so much as a thank you. Elena was one of them. Draven's fists clenched at his sides, though whether from anger or something else, Owen could not tell. Without another word, the alpha turned and stormed out of the hall, leaving Owen standing alone, with a growing sense that this was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. Draven walked without purpose through the packhouse corridors, his mind racing in a way it rarely did. He passed the healing house and found himself stopping in the doorway, staring into the empty space where Elena had worked for years. The shelves were organized with a precision he had never noticed before, small labels, written in neat handwriting identifying each herb and its purpose. A worn wooden chair sat in the corner, positioned near the window where the light was best, presumably where she sat during quiet hours. He tried to picture her face, and found, uncomfortably, that the details were blurry in his memory. Brown hair, he thought, or perhaps dark blonde. He genuinely could not be certain. He remembered her hands more clearly than her face, steady and gentle even when treating serious wounds, always working with quiet efficiency that he had simply come to expect, without ever questioning where that skill came from, or what it cost her. He thought of the night 3 years ago, when a border conflict had left him with a deep gash across his shoulder, the kind of wound that could have festered into something far worse without proper care. He remembered waking in the healing house in the early hours of morning, his shoulder wrapped tightly, the pain already fading thanks to whatever treatment had been applied while he slept. He had asked who had tended to him, and been told, distractedly, that the healer had handled it. He had never followed up to learn her name. Had that been Elena? He suspected it had been. The realization sat uncomfortably in his chest, a strange mixture of guilt and confusion he was not accustomed to feeling. He left the healing house and continued walking, eventually finding himself outside on the training field, where he had spent countless hours as a young alpha, proving his strength to a pack that needed to believe in his leadership. He remembered, suddenly, a night from years ago, when he had pushed himself too hard during training and collapsed from exhaustion. Someone had found him, had helped him back to the healing house, had sat with him through the night to make sure his fever broke safely. He had been half-conscious for much of that night, but he remembered, now that he thought about it, soft hands checking his temperature, a quiet voice speaking words of comfort he could not quite recall. He had assumed at the time it was Grace. Now he was not so certain. Elena Cross found him there an hour later, still standing in the middle of the empty training field, lost in thoughts he could not seem to organize into anything coherent. Elena was the daughter of an allied Pax Alpha, a woman Draven's advisors had been quietly encouraging him to consider as a potential mate for the political stability such a union would bring. "You look troubled," Elena said, approaching with the easy confidence she always carried. "Is something wrong?" "The healer left," Draven said, still staring at nothing in particular. "Elena, she left the pack last night." Elena's expression flickered with something Draven did not quite catch, gone too quickly to identify. "That is unfortunate. I am sure Grace can find a replacement." "That is not the point," Draven said, more sharply than he intended. Elena raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his tone. "Then what is the point? She was an apprentice healer, Draven. Pack members come and go. This is not worth troubling yourself over." Draven turned to look at her fully for the first time since she had arrived. Something about her dismissive tone bothered him in a way he could not fully articulate. She was not simply an apprentice. "Owen tells me she has run the healing house alone for years. And now she has left to run someone else's healing house instead, I imagine," Elena said with a slight shrug. "These things happen. You have far more important matters to focus on, such as our upcoming alliance discussions." Draven did not respond immediately, his mind still turning over the strange, unsettled feeling that had taken root in his chest since Owen delivered the news that morning. He thought of 9 years, a number that kept repeating in his mind, though he could not say exactly why it felt significant. 9 years was a long time to work faithfully for someone who apparently could not even remember her name. "I need to think," Draven said finally, and walked away from Alina without further explanation, leaving her standing alone on the training field with an expression that had shifted from confusion into something colder and more calculating. That night, Draven sat alone in his study, staring at reports he could not focus on. His mind kept drifting back to fragments of memory, involving a quiet presence at the edge of his awareness for years, a person who had apparently been essential to the smooth functioning of his pack, without him ever truly acknowledging her contribution. He thought about the birthday celebration 18 months ago, when the entire pack had gathered to celebrate his 25th year. He remembered laughing with various pack members, accepting congratulations from allies and warriors alike. Had she been there? He tried to picture the crowd, and found he genuinely could not recall. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Draven Ashworth felt the uncomfortable weight of his own blindness settling over him like a heavy cloak he could not shrug off. He had built his reputation on strategic awareness, on knowing every detail that mattered to his pack's survival and success, and yet he had somehow managed to overlook, for 9 full years, a woman who had apparently dedicated her entire adult life to serving his pack, with quiet, unacknowledged devotion. He did not sleep well that night, his mind circling endlessly around questions he could not answer, and a growing unease he did not know how to name. The herb inventory ran out first. 3 days after Elena left, Lucas Farrow, a young guard who had suffered a deep cut during training, arrived at the healing house expecting quick and competent treatment. Instead, he found Grace Doyle frantically searching through half-empty shelves, unable to locate the specific blend of numbing herbs that Elena had always kept perfectly stocked and clearly labeled. "I am sorry," Grace said, her hands shaking slightly as she searched. "Elena managed all of this. I know the basics, but her system, her preparations, they were specific to her methods. I need time to figure out what she used." Lucas winced as Grace attempted an improvised treatment, the pain far sharper than it should have been with proper supplies on hand. Word spread quickly through the pack about the difficulties in the healing house, and within a week, the absence of Elena Voss had become a topic of hushed conversation throughout every corner of pack territory. The healing schedules, once seamlessly organized, fell into chaos. Data had maintained a careful system of appointments, prioritizing serious injuries while ensuring routine checkups for elderly pack members were never neglected. Without her, Grace struggled to balance the competing demands, and several pack members found themselves waiting hours for treatment that would have taken Elena only minutes to address efficiently. Owen watched the growing disorder with a mixture of frustration and vindication. He had tried to warn Draven that Elena's departure would create real problems, not just for the healing house but for the pack's overall functioning. He had not expected the consequences to manifest so quickly or so visibly. Draven, for his part, found himself unable to focus on his usual duties. He caught himself, more than once, walking past the healing house and pausing at the doorway, half expecting to see Elena's familiar quiet presence, organizing supplies or treating a patient. Each time, the empty space where she should have been left him feeling strangely hollow. He began asking questions, quietly at first, then with growing urgency. He asked Owen for details about Elena's history with the pack, about her responsibilities, about the quiet contributions she had made over the years that had apparently gone unnoticed by everyone except those who worked closely alongside her. What he learned unsettled him deeply. He learned that Elena had arrived at 17, orphaned and alone, after her birth pack had been destroyed in a territorial conflict with a rival group. Grace had taken her in, training her not just in the practical skills of healing, but in the deeper, older traditions of pack medicine that few young wolves bothered to learn anymore. Elena had proven to be a natural talent, absorbing knowledge quickly and developing her own innovations to traditional treatments. He learned that she had single-handedly managed the pack's response during a serious illness outbreak 6 years earlier, working around the clock for nearly 2 weeks to ensure no one died from what could have become a devastating epidemic. Draven remembered that outbreak vaguely, remembered being relieved when the crisis passed, but had never known the details of who had managed the response or at what personal cost. He learned that she had quietly declined several opportunities to leave the pack over the years, opportunities from other territories that had recognized her exceptional skill and offered better compensation and more recognition. She had stayed, each time, out of loyalty to a pack that had apparently never fully appreciated what it had in her. Why did she stay? Draven asked Owen one evening, genuinely bewildered. If other packs offered her better opportunities, why remain here? Owen hesitated before answering, choosing his words with obvious care. I think you already know the answer to that question, Draven. Or at least, I think you are beginning to suspect it. Draven's expression shifted, a flicker of something uncomfortable crossing his features. You think she stayed because of me? I think, Owen said carefully, that a woman does not dedicate 9 years of her life to a pack, turning down better opportunities elsewhere, without a reason that goes beyond simple professional loyalty. I cannot say for certain what was in her heart. But I have my suspicions, and I imagine you do as well. Draven did not respond immediately, his mind working through implications he found deeply uncomfortable to consider. He thought back through years of interactions, searching his memory for moments he might have misread or entirely missed. He remembered small gestures now, ones he had never thought twice about at the time. The way she always seemed to know exactly what he needed before he asked. The careful, precise way she had always avoided direct eye contact during their interactions, a behavior he had simply attributed to shyness or professional deference. He thought about the birthday celebration again, and this time, with more effort, he managed to summon a fragment of memory. A quiet figure near the edge of the gathering, watching from a distance, rather than joining the crowd around him. Had that been Elena? He genuinely could not be certain, but the possibility settled uncomfortably in his chest. That night, unable to sleep, Draven found himself in his study once more, staring at the ledgers Elena had maintained for the healing house. Her handwriting was neat and precise, each entry carefully organized by date and treatment type. He noticed, as he flipped through the pages, small personal touches scattered throughout. Notes about which pack members preferred certain treatments, reminders about seasonal allergies, careful tracking of chronic conditions among the pack's older members. This was not the work of someone simply going through the motions. This was the work of someone who genuinely cared about every single person under her care, who had built an entire system around ensuring the pack's well-being, without ever asking for recognition or praise. Draven closed the ledger and sat back in his chair, staring at nothing in particular. He thought about his own leadership style, the way he had always prided himself on strength and strategic thinking, on making the difficult decisions necessary to keep the pack safe from external threats. He had never considered that the true strength of a pack might also depend on quieter contributions, on the people working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure everyone's daily needs were met. He had failed to see Elena Voss, not just as a potential mate, but as a person entirely. He had reduced her, in his mind, to a function, a service the pack provided to itself, rather than recognizing her as an individual with her own dreams, her own needs, her own capacity for exhaustion and hurt. The realization sat heavily in his chest, refusing to be ignored no matter how he tried to distract himself with other pack business. Alina noticed the change in him almost immediately, and it did not please her. She found him increasingly distracted during their meetings, his attention drifting to matters that had nothing to do with the alliance discussions his advisors had been pushing him toward for months. "You seem preoccupied," she said one afternoon, watching him carefully as he reviewed border reports without truly absorbing the information in front of him. "Is this still about the healer?" Draven looked up, surprised by how easily she had identified the source of his distraction. "I have been thinking about the kind of leader I have been," he said honestly, "about the people I may have overlooked in my focus on larger strategic concerns." Alina's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "You are the Alpha King. Your responsibility is to the pack as a whole, to its safety and prosperity. You cannot be expected to personally attend to every individual pack member's needs. That is what lower-ranking members are for." "Perhaps," Draven said slowly, "but perhaps that is exactly the kind of thinking that allowed someone as valuable as Elena to feel invisible for 9 years. Perhaps that is exactly the kind of thinking I need to reconsider." Alina's jaw tightened, though she quickly smoothed her expression back into calm composure. "You are overthinking this, Draven. She was an apprentice healer who left for better opportunities elsewhere. It happens all the time. There is no need to torture yourself over it." But Draven was no longer listening closely to her reassurances. His mind had already moved elsewhere, turning over the growing pile of evidence suggesting that his blindness toward Elena Voss had cost his pack far more than he had initially realized, and that it had cost her, personally, even more than that. He excused himself from the conversation, leaving Alina standing alone, with an expression that had shifted from mild irritation into something considerably colder, though Draven, still lost in his own thoughts, did not notice the change at all. The scream tore through the training field before anyone understood what had happened. A young warrior named Nathan Cole had misjudged a sparring drill, and his opponent's claws had caught his side, opening a wound far deeper than anyone anticipated. Blood soaked quickly through his shirt as pack members rushed toward him, shouting for help. Grace arrived within minutes, but her hands trembled as she assessed the wound. This was beyond routine treatment, the kind of injury that required precise, confident intervention to prevent serious complications. She had learned much from Elena over the years, but she had never developed the same steady expertise for emergencies this severe. "I need someone who knows how to handle this properly," Grace admitted, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "This wound is too deep. I am not confident I can manage it alone." Draven arrived at the training field just as Grace spoke those words, his stomach dropping at the sight of Nathan's pale face and the growing pool of blood beneath him. He had seen serious injuries before, had commanded warriors through countless battles, but something about watching a young pack member's life hang in the balance, while their healer admitted uncertainty, struck him with unexpected force. "Do whatever you can," Draven ordered, though even as the words left his mouth, he recognized the inadequacy of the command. Grace was already doing everything within her power. The problem was not effort, but expertise. Expertise that had walked out of the pack's territory 3 weeks earlier and had not been replaced. They managed to stabilize Nathan eventually, though the process took nearly twice as long as it should have, and the young warrior would carry a scar, far more prominent than necessary, because proper treatment had not been available in the crucial early minutes. Draven watched the entire ordeal with growing frustration, a frustration that was, he slowly began to realize, directed less at the situation itself and more at himself for allowing it to become possible. That evening, he called Owen into his study, his expression grim and resolved. "We need Elena back," he said without preamble, "or we need someone equally skilled to replace her. This cannot continue." Owen studied his alpha carefully before responding. "You cannot simply summon her back like a tool you misplaced, Draven. She left because this pack, because you, failed to value her properly for 9 years. If you want her back, that requires more than a simple command." Draven's jaw tightened, frustration evident in the tense line of his shoulders. "Then what would you have me do?" "I would have you actually consider what she needs," Owen said. "Not what the pack needs from her, but what she, as a person, might need to feel valued and respected. That is a very different question, and I suspect you have never truly asked it before." Draven fell silent, turning Owen's words over in his mind. He thought about the ledgers he had reviewed, the careful notes about each pack member's needs, the years of quiet dedication that had gone almost entirely unacknowledged. He thought about the birthday celebration he could barely remember her attending, about the countless nights she must have spent working, while he focused entirely on matters he considered more important. "I do not even know where she went," Draven admitted quietly. "I do not know how to find her." Owen hesitated before answering. Grace might know. Elena mentioned something about a coastal pack before she left, though she was careful not to share too many details. I believe she wanted a clean break, without the risk of being followed or pressured to return. Draven absorbed this information, a plan slowly forming in his mind despite the obvious obstacles ahead. "I need to speak with Grace." Grace, when Draven finally approached her, was initially reluctant to share what little information she possessed. Her loyalty to Elena, forged over 9 years of close mentorship, made her hesitant to betray her former apprentice's trust, even to the pack's own alpha. "Why does it matter to you now?" Grace asked pointedly, studying Draven with an expression that held more challenge than deference. "For 9 years, you barely acknowledged her existence. Now that her absence is inconveniencing you, suddenly you wish to track her down?" The directness of the accusation stung more than Draven expected. He had grown accustomed to a certain level of deference from pack members, but Grace's words carried the weight of genuine anger, anger on behalf of someone she clearly loved like family. "You are right to question my motives," Draven said slowly, forcing himself to sit with the discomfort of the accusation rather than deflecting it. For 9 years, I failed to see her properly. I cannot change that now. But I would like the opportunity to understand what I missed, and perhaps to make amends, if such a thing is even possible at this point. Grace studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Amends require more than words, Draven Ashworth. They require genuine change, sustained over time, not a single grand gesture meant to ease your own guilty conscience. I understand that, Draven said, though even as he spoke the words, he recognized he did not yet fully grasp what such genuine change would actually require of him. Grace eventually relented, sharing that Elena had mentioned a coastal territory to the north, home to a pack led by an alpha named Cale Nordstrom. She had no further details, no exact location, only the general direction Elena had intended to travel. Armed with this fragment of information, Draven found himself facing a decision that would have seemed unthinkable just 3 weeks earlier. Should he travel north himself, seeking out a woman who had every reason to want nothing more to do with him? Or should he respect the clean break she had clearly intended to make, focusing instead on rebuilding his pack's healing capabilities through other means? He spent several sleepless nights wrestling with the question, his mind circling endlessly through memories he was only now beginning to properly examine. He thought about every interaction he could recall with Elena over the years, searching for signs he might have missed, moments where a more attentive alpha might have noticed the quiet devotion hidden beneath professional composure. It was during one of these sleepless nights that his wolf, largely silent throughout his adult life except for the practical purposes of shifting and territorial instinct, stirred with an intensity that caught Draven completely off guard. He had always assumed, based on his wolf's general indifference to the various women his advisors had suggested as potential mates, that his wolf simply had not yet found its match. He had grown accustomed to this indifference, had even begun to wonder if perhaps he was destined to lead his pack without ever finding the deep bond that mated pairs supposedly shared. But now, lying awake in the darkness, thinking about Elena Voss, his wolf responded with a fierce, undeniable recognition that left him breathless. Memories flooded back with sudden clarity. Memories his conscious mind had apparently filed away without proper attention. The specific scent of herbs that always seemed to follow her through the corridors. The particular way his shoulder wound had healed with unusual speed after her treatment years ago. The strange sense of calm that had settled over him during his fever, when a quiet voice had spoken softly beside his bed through the worst of the night. His wolf had known, Draven realized with dawning horror. His wolf had recognized Elena as something significant, perhaps even as his fated mate, and he had been too distracted, too focused on external threats and strategic concerns, to ever properly listen to what his own instincts had been trying to tell him. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. 9 years. He had spent 9 years in close proximity to his own fated mate, and he had never once recognized her for what she truly was, allowing her to leave his territory entirely, without ever offering her the chance to know what she meant to him, without ever giving himself the chance to understand what he had been missing. He rose from his bed in the early hours of morning, dressed quickly, and made his way to Owen's quarters, pounding on the door until his beta answered, bleary-eyed and confused. "I need to go north," Draven said, his voice carrying an urgency Owen had rarely heard from his alpha. "I believe Elena may be my fated mate, and I cannot allow her to build a life elsewhere without at least attempting to understand what I have lost." Owen stared at him for a long moment, processing this sudden and dramatic shift. "Are you certain?" "This is not a small claim to make, Draven. I am not certain of much right now," Draven admitted honestly, "but I am certain that I cannot continue living with the uncertainty of not knowing. I have to find her. I have to try to make this right, whatever that ultimately means." Owen nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what his alpha was proposing. "Then we should prepare for the journey properly. If she has found a place with Cale Nordstrom's pack, we cannot simply arrive demanding answers. We will need to approach this with care, with respect for whatever life she may already be building there." Draven agreed, though impatience gnawed at him with an intensity he had rarely experienced. For the first time in his adult life, the careful, strategic thinking that had always guided his decisions felt secondary to a more urgent, more personal need. He needed to see Elena again. He needed to understand what 9 years of blindness had cost them both, and he needed to discover whether there remained any possibility of building something real between them, now that he had finally, painfully, begun to see clearly. The cliffside healing house smelled of salt and fresh herbs, a combination Elena had grown to love in the 3 weeks since her arrival. She stood at the wide window overlooking the ocean, watching waves crash against the rocks below, and felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. Contentment. Cale Nordstrom's pack had welcomed her with a warmth that still occasionally caught her off guard. Within her first few days, she had been given her own quarters, a proper healing house stocked with quality supplies, and complete authority over the pack's medical needs. No one questioned her decisions or overlooked her expertise. When she spoke, people listened. The morning rounds went well, Cale said, appearing in the doorway with the easy confidence that seemed to characterize everything he did. He was younger than Draven by a few years, his manner more open and approachable, quick to smile in a way that had initially surprised Elena after years spent around a much colder leadership style. Grandmother Ellis's joints are improving with the new treatment, Elena confirmed, and young Petra's fever broke overnight. I think we caught it early enough to avoid complications. Cale nodded, clearly pleased. You have made a real difference here already, Elena. This pack is fortunate to have you. The simple acknowledgement still felt strange to her ears, though she was slowly growing more comfortable receiving it. 9 years with Draven Ashworth had trained her to expect silence in response to her efforts, to find her own quiet satisfaction in work well done, since external recognition rarely came. Cale's pack operated entirely differently, with genuine gratitude expressed openly and often. Thank you, Elena said, and found she meant it fully. I am grateful for the opportunity. Cale lingered in the doorway a moment longer than strictly necessary. I was wondering if you might be free this evening. There is a gathering by the shore, nothing formal, just pack members enjoying the sunset together. I thought you might enjoy joining us, if you are not too exhausted from the day's work. Elena considered the invitation, surprised by how easily she found herself agreeing. In her old pack, such invitations had rarely come her way, and when they had, she had often declined out of exhaustion, or a lingering sense that she did not quite belong among the social gatherings of higher-ranking pack members. Here, though, she had already been welcomed into the pack's social fabric with genuine warmth. I would like that, she said. That evening, as the sun sank low over the water, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Elena found herself seated among a small group of pack members, sharing food and easy conversation. Cale sat beside her, attentive without being overwhelming, asking thoughtful questions about her life before joining the coastal pack, listening carefully to her answers in a way that made her feel genuinely heard. You mentioned once that you trained under a healer named Grace, Cale said. How long were you with your previous pack? Elena hesitated, the question stirring up memories she had been carefully avoiding since her arrival. 9 years, she said finally. I arrived as a teenager, after losing my birth pack. That must have been difficult, Cale said, his tone gentle rather than probing, both the loss and starting over in a new place. It was, Elena admitted. Grace was kind to me, taught me everything I know about healing. I owe her a great deal. And the pack itself? Cale asked carefully. You do not have to answer if it is too personal, but I have wondered what would drive someone with your skill to leave a pack after 9 years of service, especially with so little warning to your previous leadership. Elena took a moment before answering, choosing her words carefully. She had not spoken openly about her reasons for leaving to anyone in her new pack, preferring to focus on building her new life rather than dwelling on the pain of her old one. I spent a long time feeling invisible there, she said finally. Working hard, contributing meaningfully, but never quite being seen for who I was or what I offered. Eventually, I realized that waiting for someone to finally notice was not a way to build a life. I needed to find a place where I would be valued from the start, rather than hoping to earn recognition that might never come. Cale studied her thoughtfully, something warm and genuine in his expression. Whoever failed to see your worth clearly was a fool, Elena. I hope you know that. This pack considers itself fortunate to have someone with your skill and dedication, and I intend to make sure you feel that appreciation regularly, not just when convenient. Elena felt a flush of warmth at his words, genuine appreciation mixed with something she was still learning to identify. Cale's attention felt different from anything she had experienced with Draven. It felt intentional, considered, offered freely, without her having to earn it through years of silent service. The gathering continued late into the evening, and Elena found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, engaging easily with pack members who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her as a person, rather than simply valuing her for the services she provided. By the time she finally returned to her quarters, the stars bright overhead and the sound of waves still echoing in her ears, she felt something she had not expected to feel so quickly after her departure. She felt like she belonged. Over the following days, Elena settled further into her new life, establishing routines that felt genuinely her own, rather than shaped entirely around someone else's needs. She began each morning with a walk along the cliffs, watching the sunrise paint the water in shifting colors, before opening the healing house for the day's appointments. Pack members greeted her warmly as she moved through the territory, many of them already familiar with her name and grateful for her care. Cale continued his attentions, careful and respectful, never pushing beyond what Elena seemed comfortable with, but making his interest increasingly clear through small, thoughtful gestures. He brought her rare herbs he discovered during his travels, knowing she would appreciate them for her healing work. He made a point of checking in with her regularly, not out of obligation, but out of what appeared to be genuine care for her well-being. It was different from anything Elena had experienced with Draven, and she found herself slowly, cautiously, allowing herself to consider what a future with someone like Cale might look like. Someone who saw her clearly from the very beginning, rather than requiring 9 years of silent devotion before even acknowledging her name. She thought of Draven less frequently now, though he still occasionally drifted through her mind during quiet moments. She wondered, sometimes, whether the pack had managed to find a suitable replacement for her healing duties, whether Grace was managing the increased workload without too much difficulty. She wondered whether Draven had even noticed her absence beyond the practical inconvenience it likely caused. She told herself these thoughts did not matter anymore, that she had successfully left that chapter of her life behind. But some quiet part of her, the same part that had loved him faithfully for 9 years despite every reason to stop, still occasionally wondered what might have happened if he had simply noticed her sooner. She pushed these thoughts aside firmly each time they arose, focusing instead on the genuine warmth and appreciation surrounding her in her new pack. She had made her choice. She had walked away from 9 years of waiting for someone who never came, and she intended to build a future worthy of the strength that decision had required. As the days passed, Cale's attentions grew more deliberate, and Elena found herself increasingly open to the possibility of something real developing between them. He was kind, attentive, and genuinely interested in her as a person, offering exactly the kind of recognition and respect she had spent 9 years hoping to receive from someone else entirely. She did not yet know that far to the south, that same someone else was preparing to travel north, driven by a realization that had come far too late, but was, perhaps, not entirely too late to matter. Ivy Sutton had worked in the packhouse kitchens for over a decade, long enough to notice every shift in mood among the pack's leadership. When Draven Ashworth announced his intention to travel north personally, leaving Owen temporarily in charge of daily pack operations, the news spread through the territory faster than any official announcement could have managed. "He is going after her," Ivy told Grace, as they stood together in the healing house, watching pack members bustle about with unusual energy, despite the early hour. "The whole territory is buzzing about it. No one can quite believe the Alpha is chasing down a woman himself, rather than sending scouts or simply moving on to more pressing matters." Grace's expression remained carefully neutral, though something like cautious hope flickered behind her eyes. It is about time someone in that man's position of authority understood the value of what walked out of this pack 3 weeks ago. The investigation into Elena's absence had grown more thorough over the intervening weeks, as Draven pushed Owen and other trusted advisors to help him understand the full scope of what he had failed to notice during her 9 years of service. What emerged painted a picture that left Draven increasingly uncomfortable with his own past behavior. He learned, through careful questioning of various pack members, about the countless small sacrifices Elena had made over the years. The nights she had stayed awake tending to sick children, missing sleep she desperately needed for her own well-being, the personal savings she had quietly spent, without ever requesting reimbursement, to purchase rare healing supplies during a particularly difficult winter, when pack resources had been stretched thin by conflict with a neighboring territory. He learned about the birthday celebration he had barely remembered, and this time, when he pressed Owen for more specific details, his beta reluctantly confirmed what Draven had begun to suspect. Elena had indeed been present, standing quietly at the edge of the gathering, watching him celebrate surrounded by people who had never bothered to properly acknowledge her contributions to the pack's well-being. She left early that night, Owen admitted. I remember now. I asked her why, and she said she was tired from a long day of appointments. I did not think much of it at the time. Draven absorbed this information with growing discomfort, each new detail adding to a portrait of a woman who had given everything to his pack, while receiving almost nothing in return, beyond the basic necessities of shelter and steady employment. He thought about his own birthday celebrations over the years, always focused on himself and his relationships with allies and advisors, never once considering whether everyone present felt equally valued and included. The most difficult revelation came when Owen finally shared the details of the illness outbreak from 6 years earlier, an event Draven remembered only vaguely as a difficult period the pack had successfully weathered. Owen described, in careful detail, how Elena had worked nearly around the clock for 2 weeks straight, sleeping only a few hours each night, personally visiting every affected household to provide treatment and monitor recovery progress. She nearly collapsed from exhaustion toward the end, Owen said quietly. Grace found her passed out in the healing house one morning, having pushed herself past her physical limits to ensure everyone received proper care. And when the crisis finally passed, when the pack celebrated surviving what could have been a devastating epidemic, do you remember what happened? Draven searched his memory, though he suspected he already knew the answer would be another painful gap in his awareness. There was no formal recognition for her efforts, Owen continued, when Draven remained silent. The pack thanked Grace, as the senior healer, without realizing that Elena had done the vast majority of the actual work. She never corrected the misunderstanding. She simply continued her duties without complaint, as she always did. The weight of these accumulated failures settled over Draven, with increasing intensity, as the day of his departure approached. He found himself questioning not just his treatment of Elena specifically, but his entire approach to leadership, his tendency to focus exclusively on visible strength and strategic advantage, while remaining blind to the quieter contributions that truly sustained his pack's well-being. The morning of his departure, Draven gathered a small group of trusted companions, including Owen, for the journey north. He had considered traveling alone, feeling that the personal nature of his mission warranted privacy, but Owen had convinced him that arriving with proper escort would demonstrate appropriate respect for both his own position and for Cale Nordstrom's pack, whose territory they would be entering. As they prepared to leave, Grace approached Draven with an expression that carried both hope and warning in equal measure. If you find her, Grace said, and I suspect you will, since Elena's skills are the kind other packs actively seek out, I need you to understand something important. She left because this pack, because you specifically, made her feel invisible for 9 years. Simply showing up and declaring your feelings, even if those feelings are genuine, will not erase that history. She deserves real proof of change, not just words spoken in a moment of guilt-driven realization. Draven nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of Grace's warning. I understand that. I do not expect this to be simple or quick. I only hope she will give me the chance to demonstrate genuine change, even if that process takes considerable time. Grace studied him for a long moment before nodding, apparently satisfied that his intentions carried enough sincerity to warrant the journey ahead. Then I wish you safe travels, Draven Ashworth, and I hope, for both your sakes, that this journey proves worthwhile. The journey north took 3 days, mirroring almost exactly the path Elena had traveled weeks earlier, though Draven's group moved with the advantage of horses and proper supplies that made the trip considerably more comfortable than her solitary walk had been. Draven spent much of the journey in contemplative silence, his mind working through what he would say when he finally found her, how he might begin to explain 9 years of blindness in a way that felt genuine rather than simply desperate. As they crossed into neutral territory on the second day, Owen rode alongside him, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. What will you do if she has already moved on? Owen asked carefully. If she has found happiness elsewhere, perhaps even with someone else? The question struck Draven with unexpected force, a possibility he had been carefully avoiding considering directly. Then I will have to accept that consequence as the price of my own failure, he said finally. I cannot force her to feel something she no longer feels, or to want a life with someone who took 9 years to properly see her. If she has found happiness, genuine happiness, with someone who values her the way she deserves, then perhaps the most respectful thing I can do is acknowledge my mistakes and let her build the life she has chosen without further interference. Owen studied his alpha with something like surprised respect. That is a more mature response than I expected, honestly. Draven managed a small, humorless smile. I have had considerable time to reflect on my failures these past weeks, Owen. I would like to think I am capable of learning from them, even if that learning arrived far too late to prevent the initial damage. They continued their journey through the following day, the terrain gradually shifting from familiar forest to the rolling hills that marked the approach to coastal territory. As the salt air began to reach them on the wind, carrying the distant sound of ocean waves, Draven felt a nervous anticipation building in his chest that he had rarely experienced in his adult life. He was about to face the consequences of 9 years of blindness, and he had no guarantee that Elena would be willing to offer him the chance to make amends. But he had come too far now to turn back, driven by a wolf's undeniable recognition and a growing understanding of just how much he had lost through his own failure to truly see the person who had loved him faithfully, in silence, for far too long. That evening, as they made camp within sight of the coastal territory's borders, Draven found himself unable to sleep, his mind cycling through possible scenarios for the following day's confrontation. He thought about Cale Nordstrom, whose reputation as a fair and generous leader had reached even Draven's territory over the years, and wondered with uncomfortable clarity whether Elena might already be building something meaningful with this rival alpha, something that would make Draven's arrival unwelcome rather than hoped for. He did not know, as he finally drifted into restless sleep, that his instincts about Cale's growing interest in Elena were entirely correct, or that his arrival the following day would set into motion a confrontation that would test everything Elena had built for herself in her brief weeks of freedom from 9 years of silent devotion. The border patrol spotted them within minutes of crossing into Cale Nordstrom's territory, 4 armed warriors emerging from the tree line, with weapons drawn and expressions wary. Draven raised his hands slowly, signaling peaceful intent, while Owen called out an introduction, explaining their purpose and requesting an audience with the pack's alpha. Word traveled quickly through coastal territory, and within the hour, Draven found himself standing before Cale Nordstrom in a meeting hall that overlooked the ocean, the sound of waves audible even through the thick stone walls. Cale studied him with evident curiosity, clearly having already guessed the reason behind this unexpected visit. "Alpha Ashworth," Cale said, his tone polite, but carrying an underlying edge of challenge. "This is an unusual visit. Your territory lies considerably south of here. I assume you have a specific purpose in mind, given the distance you have traveled." Draven met his gaze directly, deciding that honesty would serve him better than diplomatic evasion. "I am looking for someone, a healer named Elena Voss, who I believe joined your pack several weeks ago." Something shifted in Cale's expression, a careful neutrality settling over features that had initially seemed open and welcoming. "Elena has indeed joined our pack, and she has proven to be an exceptional healer, valued deeply by every member of this territory. May I ask why the alpha of her previous pack has traveled so far to inquire about her?" Draven hesitated, aware that his answer carried significant weight, both for his own purposes and potentially for whatever relationship might be developing between Elena and this rival alpha. "I made serious mistakes during her time with my pack," he said finally. "Mistakes I only recently came to fully understand. I have traveled here hoping for the opportunity to speak with her directly, to acknowledge those mistakes, and to understand whether there remains any possibility of making amends." Cale studied him for a long moment, his expression difficult to read. Elena has spoken very little about her previous pack, though what she has shared suggests those mistakes were significant and long-standing, not simple oversights easily corrected with a single conversation. "I do not expect a single conversation to resolve 9 years of failure," Draven said honestly, "but I would ask for the opportunity to at least speak with her, if she is willing. The choice of whether to hear me out should belong to her, not to either of us deciding on her behalf." Cale's jaw tightened slightly at this, though he seemed to recognize the fairness of the request, even as something like reluctance flickered across his features. "I will inform her of your presence. Whether she chooses to speak with you will be entirely her decision, and I will respect that choice regardless of what she decides." Elena was tending to a young pack member's minor injury when Cale found her, his expression carrying a seriousness that immediately caught her attention. She finished wrapping the bandage before turning her full attention toward him. "What is it?" she asked, noting the careful way he seemed to be choosing his words. "Draven Ashworth has arrived at our territory," Cale said. "He is asking to speak with you." The words hit Elena with the force of a physical blow, her hands going still as she processed this completely unexpected development. In her weeks of building a new life along the coast, she had never once considered the possibility that Draven might actually come looking for her, might actually notice her absence enough to travel this far to address it. "Why?" she asked, her voice tighter than she intended. "He claims to have made serious mistakes he wishes to acknowledge," Cale said carefully. "I told him the choice of whether to speak with him belongs entirely to you. You are under no obligation to see him, Elena. If you would prefer he simply leave." Elena stood in silence for a long moment, her mind racing through 9 years of memories, through the pain of leaving, through the fragile new life she had begun building for herself in this new territory. Part of her wanted nothing more than to refuse, to send word that she had no interest in anything Draven Ashworth had to say after 9 years of silence. But another part of her, the part that had spent 9 years hoping for exactly this moment, could not simply dismiss the possibility without at least hearing what he had to say. "I will speak with him," she said finally, "but not immediately. I need time to gather my thoughts." Cale nodded, respecting her decision without argument. "Take whatever time you need. I will make sure he waits, and that he understands this meeting happens entirely on your terms." That afternoon, Elena walked along the cliffs overlooking the ocean, trying to steady her racing thoughts before facing the man who had shaped 9 years of her life through his very blindness. She thought about everything she had built in her brief weeks of freedom, the respect and appreciation she had found among Cale's pack, the beginning of something that felt genuine and reciprocal with Cale himself. She thought, too, about the years of silent devotion, about every unnoticed sacrifice, and every moment of hoping he would finally see her. She had walked away, because she deserved better than waiting endlessly for recognition that never came. She would not allow his sudden arrival to erase the strength that decision had required. When she finally returned to the meeting hall, prepared to face him, she found Draven waiting alone in a small side room, having apparently insisted on privacy for their conversation. He rose immediately when she entered, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the space that separated them, 9 years of history hanging heavy in the silence. "Elena," Draven said finally, his voice carrying an uncertainty she had never heard from him before. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Elena remained standing near the door, unwilling to move further into the room, until she understood his true purpose in coming here. "Say what you came to say, Draven." He nodded, seeming to steady himself before continuing. "I have spent the past 3 weeks learning things about your time in my pack that I should have known all along. The illness outbreak you managed almost entirely alone. The birthday celebration, where you stood at the edges, while I celebrated, surrounded by people who never bothered to properly acknowledge you. The countless nights you sacrificed for a pack that took your dedication entirely for granted." Elena's expression remained carefully guarded, though something flickered behind her eyes at his words. "You are only now learning these things, after 9 years?" "Yes," Draven admitted, the word carrying genuine shame. "I failed to see you, Elena, not just as someone deserving of proper recognition for her work, but as a person entirely. I reduced you, in my own mind, to a function the pack relied upon, rather than recognizing you as an individual with your own needs, your own capacity for exhaustion and hurt." Elena felt tears threatening despite her determination to remain composed, 9 years of pain rising to the surface at hearing him finally acknowledge what she had known all along. "Do you have any idea what those 9 years cost me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to control it. "Do you understand what it felt like to love someone faithfully, to sacrifice everything for his pack's well-being, while he could not even remember my name?" "I am beginning to understand," Draven said quietly. "Though I suspect I will never fully comprehend the true extent of what my blindness cost you, no matter how much I try to make amends." The word love hung between them, unspoken, but clearly understood by both parties. Elena had not explicitly stated her feelings, but her words made the truth undeniable, and Draven's careful acknowledgement suggested he had already suspected as much. perhaps even before his wolf's undeniable recognition had confirmed what he had been too blind to see. "Why are you really here, Draven?" Elena asked, needing to hear him say it plainly, rather than continuing to dance around the truth neither of them had yet fully spoken aloud. Draven took a steadying breath before answering. "My wolf recognized you as my fated mate, Elena. Not recently, but years ago, though I was too distracted, too focused on external matters, to ever properly listen to what my own instincts were trying to tell me. I have come here because I believe we are meant to be together, and because I owe you the chance to know that truth, even if you ultimately choose not to accept it." The revelation hit Elena with unexpected force, confirming suspicions she had carried quietly for years, but had never allowed herself to fully believe. Her wolf, too, stirred with recognition at his words, a fierce and undeniable pull that she had spent 9 years trying to suppress and rationalize away. But recognition alone, she reminded herself firmly, did not erase 9 years of pain, nor did it guarantee that Draven had truly changed, in ways that would matter for their future together. "Being my fated mate does not automatically mean we belong together," Elena said carefully. "Fate provides opportunity, Draven. It does not erase the choices we make, or the consequences of 9 years spent ignoring someone who loved you faithfully in silence." Draven nodded, accepting this truth without argument. "I understand that. I am not asking you to simply accept the mate bond and forget everything that came before. I am asking for the chance to prove, through sustained action rather than words alone, that I am capable of becoming someone worthy of the love you offered so faithfully for so many years." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any sign of the same blindness and self-focus that had defined their entire history together. She found, instead, something that looked genuinely like humility, like a man who had finally been forced to confront his own failures and was, perhaps, sincerely committed to changing them. But sincerity in this moment did not guarantee lasting change, and Elena had learned, through painful experience, not to place her trust too quickly in promises that might ultimately prove empty. "I need time," she said finally. "I have built something here, Draven. A new life, new relationships, a sense of being valued that I never experienced during our 9 years together. I will not simply abandon that, because you have finally decided to notice me." "I would never ask you to," Draven said firmly. "Whatever happens between us, or does not happen, I only ask that you know the truth. I see you now, Elena. Fully, completely, in ways I failed to for far too long. What you choose to do with that knowledge belongs entirely to you." Elena nodded slowly, though she offered no promises, no immediate resolution, to the complicated tangle of emotions his arrival had stirred within her. She needed time to process everything he had shared, time to determine whether genuine change was truly possible, and time to consider what she wanted for her own future, independent of any fated bond or belated recognition from a man who had taken 9 years too long to finally see her clearly. Cale found Elena standing alone on the cliffs later that evening, her expression distant as she watched the last light fade from the horizon. He approached carefully, sensing the weight of whatever conversation had taken place between her and the visiting alpha. "You do not have to talk about it if you are not ready," Cale said, settling beside her at a respectful distance. "But I am here if you need to." Elena appreciated his restraint, the way he offered support without demanding explanation. It was such a contrast to 9 years of a relationship where she had always been the one offering support, rarely receiving it in return. "He says I am his fated mate," Elena said finally, deciding that Cale deserved honesty given the genuine connection that had been building between them over recent weeks. "He came here to tell me that, and to ask for a chance to prove he has changed." Cale absorbed this information carefully, his expression difficult to read in the fading light. "And what do you believe? Do you think he has genuinely changed? Or is this simply guilt speaking, a temporary reaction that will fade once the initial shock of your absence wears off?" "I do not know," Elena admitted honestly. 9 years taught me not to trust promises easily, especially not from him. But something in the way he spoke today felt different from the distracted indifference I grew accustomed to during our years together. Cale nodded slowly, though Elena could sense the complicated emotions beneath his measured response. "I care for you, Elena. I have made no secret of that these past weeks. But I also understand that a fated bond carries weight beyond simple choice or preference." I will not pretend I am not troubled by his arrival, but I also will not ask you to ignore something that significant simply because it complicates what has been developing between us. Elena turned to look at him fully, genuinely touched by his honesty and restraint. You could try to convince me to dismiss him entirely. Many in your position would. I could, Cale acknowledged. But that would not be fair to you, and ultimately, I do not believe it would lead to genuine happiness for either of us. You deserve the chance to make this decision clearly, without pressure from either of us, pulling you in different directions based on our own desires, rather than your true well-being. The following days passed in a strange, tense equilibrium, as Elena tried to process everything Draven's arrival had disrupted. He remained in coastal territory, staying at guest quarters Cale had reluctantly provided, giving Elena the space she had requested, while making clear through his continued presence that he had not simply given up and returned home. She watched him during this time, observing his interactions with Cale's pack members, curious to see whether his claimed transformation extended beyond simply seeking her forgiveness. What she witnessed surprised her. Draven, rather than remaining isolated in guest quarters awaiting her decision, actively engaged with the coastal pack's daily operations, offering assistance where welcomed, and observing quietly where it was not. She saw him helping repair storm damage to fishing equipment, working alongside warriors he had never met before, showing a willingness to contribute without demanding recognition that felt entirely foreign to the man she had known for 9 years. She saw him too, in quieter moments, speaking with elderly pack members about their experiences, listening with genuine attention, rather than the distracted courtesy she remembered from his interactions with less powerful pack members in his own territory. He seemed, in these unguarded moments, to be genuinely trying to understand what true leadership and true presence might look like, rather than simply performing changed behavior for her benefit. A week after his arrival, Elena finally sought him out directly, finding him near the training grounds, watching a group of young warriors practice with an attentiveness that suggested genuine interest rather than mere observation. You have been busy, she said, approaching carefully. Draven turned, visible surprise crossing his features at her voluntary approach. I did not want to simply wait idle while you decided whether to speak with me again. I thought perhaps demonstrating change through action might mean more than further words. It does, Elena admitted. Though action over a single week does not necessarily prove sustained change, Draven. 9 years of one pattern cannot be undone by 7 days of different behavior, however genuine that behavior might currently feel. I understand that, Draven said. I am not asking you to believe I am fully transformed after a single week. I am only trying to show you the beginning of what I hope will be a lasting change, if you are willing to give me the opportunity to demonstrate it over time. Elena studied him carefully, weighing everything she had witnessed against 9 years of accumulated pain and disappointment. If I were to consider giving you that opportunity, she said slowly, it would come with conditions. I will not simply return to my old life and old patterns, waiting quietly for recognition that might fade once the immediate crisis of my absence has passed. What conditions? Draven asked, his attention fully focused on her words. I would maintain my position here, at least initially, Elena said. I have built something valuable in this pack, relationships and respect. I am not willing to simply abandon. If you are serious about pursuing whatever connection exists between us, you would need to prove that commitment through sustained effort, not through demanding I immediately return to a life that caused me so much pain. Draven nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her conditions. That seems fair, given everything I put you through. What else? I would need you to demonstrate genuine change within your own pack, not just in how you treat me specifically, Elena continued. The way you overlooked my contributions for 9 years suggests a broader pattern of leadership that likely affects other pack members as well. If you truly wish to become someone worthy of trust, that change needs to extend beyond simply noticing me. I have already begun examining that pattern, Draven said. Owen has helped me understand several other instances where I failed to properly recognize the contributions of pack members who worked quietly, without seeking attention or reward. I intend to address that broader failure, regardless of what happens between us specifically. Elena felt something shift within her chest at this response, a cautious hope beginning to take root despite her determination to remain guarded. This did not sound like a man simply seeking to win back a fated mate through calculated gestures. This sounded, perhaps, like genuine reflection and commitment to broader change. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to watch whether this change proves sustained. Time to determine whether I can trust what you are offering now, given everything that came before. I will not rush this decision simply because a fated bond exists between us." "Take whatever time you need," Draven said, and something in his tone suggested genuine patience, rather than the reluctant tolerance she might have expected from the man she remembered. "I am not going anywhere until you have made your decision, whatever that decision ultimately proves to be. And even if you choose not to pursue this connection, I intend to continue working toward becoming a better leader, a better person, regardless of the outcome." Elena nodded, appreciating the sincerity in his words even as she maintained careful distance from fully trusting them. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at him one final time. 9 years is a long time to be invisible, Draven," she said quietly. "I need to know that whatever comes next, you truly understand the depth of what that cost me. Not just intellectually, but genuinely, in ways that will guide every future decision you make." "I am trying to understand that fully," Draven said. "I suspect I will spend considerable time continuing to understand it, even if you ultimately decide not to give me the chance to prove my commitment directly. But I promise you this, Elena, I will never again allow someone who deserves recognition to remain invisible simply because I was too distracted or too focused on other matters to properly see them." Elena walked away without further response, her mind heavy with the weight of decisions still ahead of her, but something in her chest felt lighter than it had in years. A cautious hope beginning to take root, despite everything 9 years of silence had taught her about the dangers of trusting too easily. Weeks passed, then a month, and Draven remained in coastal territory, having sent word south that Owen would continue managing daily pack operations, while he focused on matters requiring his personal attention. His extended absence raised questions among his own pack members, questions Owen answered with careful diplomacy, never fully revealing the personal nature of his alpha's prolonged stay in a neighboring territory. During this time, Elena watched Draven's continued efforts with cautious but growing attention. He had taken to assisting Kale's pack in various capacities, never overstepping his welcome, but consistently demonstrating a willingness to contribute without demanding recognition or special treatment. He spent considerable time in quiet conversation with pack members across all ranks, seeming genuinely committed to understanding perspectives he had previously overlooked. He also maintained regular correspondence with Owen regarding changes he wished to implement within his own pack upon his eventual return. Elena, though she tried to maintain appropriate distance, found herself occasionally glimpsing these letters when Draven shared updates about his progress, curious, despite herself, about whether his claimed transformation extended genuinely to his broader leadership approach. The letters revealed a man actively working to identify and correct patterns of oversight that had plagued his leadership for years. He had implemented regular recognition ceremonies for pack members whose contributions often went unnoticed, ensuring that healers, cooks, craftsmen, and others whose work sustained daily pack life received proper acknowledgement rather than being taken for granted simply because their contributions lacked the visible drama of warriors defending territorial borders. He had also begun personally checking in with lower-ranking pack members, taking time to learn their names, their concerns, their individual needs, rather than simply focusing on matters that directly affected strategic pack interests. Grace, in a letter she sent to Elena directly, confirmed that these changes appeared genuine and sustained, not merely temporary gestures designed to ease guilt before reverting to old patterns. "He asked about you specifically," Grace wrote. "Not in a demanding way, but with genuine concern for your well-being. He wanted to know if you were eating properly, if you were finding rest, despite the demands of establishing yourself in a new pack. These are not the questions of a man simply seeking to reclaim something he lost. These feel like the questions of someone who has genuinely begun to understand what it means to truly care for another person's welfare." Elena read the letter several times, allowing herself to feel the cautious hope it stirred within her chest. She had spent a month watching Draven demonstrate consistent, sustained change, not just in his interactions with her, but in his broader approach to leadership and relationships throughout coastal territory and, apparently, within his own pack as well. Kale, too, had noticed the shift, and though it clearly caused him some private struggle, he approached Elena one evening with the same honesty and respect that had characterized their entire relationship. "I have watched him these past weeks," Cale said, finding her again on the familiar cliffs where they had first discussed Draven's arrival. "I expected, honestly, that his commitment would fade after a few days, that he would grow impatient with your caution, and return south, having satisfied whatever guilt drove him here initially. But he has not," Elena said quietly. "No," Cale agreed. "He has not. Whatever else I might think of the mistakes he made during your years together, I cannot deny that his current efforts appear genuine and sustained. I care for you deeply, Elena, and part of me wishes I could simply ask you to dismiss him entirely, to choose the future I believe I could offer you here. But I also believe you deserve the chance to make this decision based on complete information, without me attempting to influence you toward what serves my own interests, rather than your genuine happiness." Elena felt gratitude and sadness intertwine at his words, recognizing the genuine sacrifice inherent in his restraint. "You have shown me, these past weeks, what it feels like to be valued from the beginning, rather than having to earn recognition through years of silent sacrifice. I will never forget that gift, regardless of what I ultimately decide." Cale nodded, accepting her words with quiet grace. "Whatever you decide, Elena, know that you will always have a place here, within this pack, as a valued member and a trusted friend, regardless of whether that place ever extends beyond friendship between us specifically." The following morning, Elena sought out Draven, finding him assisting with repairs to the coastal pack's main fishing dock, his hands calloused now from weeks of physical labor that would have seemed beneath his dignity as Alpha King just months earlier. He looked up as she approached, setting aside his tools with immediate attention. "I have been watching you these past weeks," Elena said without preamble, "watching whether your claimed transformation would prove sustained or temporary. And what have you observed?" Draven asked, his tone carrying genuine uncertainty, rather than the confident assumption she might have expected from the man she once knew. "I have observed genuine change," Elena said. "Not perfect, not complete, but genuine and sustained, in ways that suggest something deeper than simple guilt or fear of losing what you finally recognized as valuable." Draven remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace, another small sign of the growth she had witnessed over the past month. "I am not ready to simply return to your pack, to resume the life I left behind," Elena continued carefully. "But I am willing to consider what a future together might look like, built on more honest and equal foundations than what existed between us during my 9 years there." Hope flickered visibly across Draven's features, though he maintained the careful restraint that had characterized his behavior throughout his extended stay. "What would that look like, in practical terms?" "I would need to maintain some independence," Elena said. "Perhaps splitting time between territories, or negotiating a role within your pack that reflects genuine partnership, rather than simple return to service. I would need continued proof of change, not just during this initial period when guilt and fresh realization drive your efforts, but sustained over months and years, through the inevitable challenges and distractions that come with pack leadership." "I am willing to commit to whatever proof you require," Draven said immediately. "Whatever time frame, whatever conditions. I understand that trust, once broken so thoroughly, cannot be rebuilt quickly or easily." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any remaining trace of the distracted indifference that had defined their history together. She found, instead, genuine attention, genuine commitment, and something that looked remarkably like the deep respect she had spent 9 years hoping to receive. "Then perhaps," she said slowly, allowing herself to hope despite everything caution demanded, "we can begin building something new together, not erasing the past 9 years, but learning from them, creating something entirely different moving forward." Draven's expression shifted into something Elena had rarely witnessed from him during their years together, a genuine, unguarded joy that transformed his usually composed features into something far more vulnerable and human. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me this chance, even though I know I have not yet fully earned it." "You have not," Elena agreed honestly, "but you have shown enough genuine effort that I am willing to continue watching, continue hoping that what you have demonstrated these past weeks reflects who you are truly becoming, rather than simply a temporary performance." They stood together on the dock, as the morning sun climbed higher over the water, neither rushing to fill the comfortable silence that had settled between them, both understanding that whatever future they built together would require patience, continued effort, and genuine commitment, far beyond this single moment of cautious reconciliation. 6 months passed before Elena finally agreed to return south, and even then, the arrangement looked nothing like the life she had left behind. She maintained regular contact with Cale's pack, returning periodically to assist with healing matters, and to nurture the genuine friendship that had survived the complicated circumstances of her departure. Draven had honored every condition she established, giving her space to make this transition on her own terms, rather than rushing her back into old patterns. The pack house looked different when she finally returned, not physically, but in the atmosphere that greeted her. Pack members she had barely known during her 9 years of quiet service now approached her with genuine warmth, having heard through Grace and Owen about her role in inspiring the significant changes Draven had implemented throughout the territory. The healing house, too, had transformed in her absence. Grace had expanded the facility, adding proper training space for new healers, recognizing that the pack could no longer afford to rely entirely on a single individual's expertise without proper support and succession planning. Elena would return not as a solitary healer working in relative obscurity, but as the senior healer, overseeing an expanding team, her expertise finally recognized with the authority and resources it had always deserved. Draven organized a formal ceremony to mark her return, an event Elena had initially resisted, wary of grand gestures that might feel more performative than genuine. But when she finally understood his true purpose, she found herself unable to refuse. The ceremony took place on the training field, where she had once watched Draven from a careful distance, invisible among pack members who never thought to include her in their celebrations. This time, she stood at the center, as Draven addressed the assembled pack with words that acknowledged, publicly and without hesitation, the 9 years of failure that had nearly cost him everything that truly mattered. For 9 years, Draven said, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd, Elena Voss served this pack with a dedication and skill that saved countless lives, that kept our people healthy and cared for through crises both large and small. And for 9 years, I failed to properly see her, failed to acknowledge her contributions, failed to recognize what she truly meant, not just to this pack, but to me personally. The crowd remained silent, absorbing words that few alphas would have the courage or humility to speak so openly before their assembled pack. I cannot undo those 9 years, Draven continued. I cannot erase the pain my blindness caused her, or the countless moments where she deserved recognition and received only silence instead. But I can commit, before all of you as witnesses, to becoming a leader who truly sees every member of this pack, who values quiet contributions as much as visible strength, who will never again allow someone as essential as Elena to feel invisible within these walls. He turned to face Elena directly, his expression carrying a vulnerability she had rarely witnessed from him. Elena, you taught me, through your absence and through everything I learned trying to understand what I had lost, that true leadership requires seeing every person clearly, not just those whose contributions demand immediate attention. You deserved better than 9 years of silence, and though I cannot give you back that time, I promise to spend whatever years remain, ensuring you never again doubt your worth or your place within this pack. Elena felt tears rising, though this time they carried joy, rather than the pain that had defined so much of her history within these walls. She looked out at the assembled pack, many faces now familiar in ways they had not been before her departure, faces that regarded her now with genuine respect and warmth, rather than the polite indifference she had grown accustomed to during her years of quiet service. 9 years ago, Elena said, stepping forward to address the pack herself, surprising even Draven with her willingness to speak publicly. I arrived here as a frightened teenager who had lost everything. This pack gave me a home, a purpose, and eventually, painful lessons about the cost of loving someone who could not see me clearly. I walked away because I finally understood that I deserved to be valued, not just tolerated or taken for granted. She paused, looking around at the crowd, before continuing. I returned today, not because 9 years of waiting was finally rewarded, but because genuine change has occurred, change I have watched unfold over months of careful observation. I return as an equal partner in whatever future this pack builds, not as someone who will accept invisibility ever again. The crowd erupted into genuine applause, a response that would have seemed impossible to Elena just months earlier, when her contributions had gone largely unnoticed, despite years of dedicated service. She felt, for the first time within these familiar walls, truly seen and truly valued. In the weeks that followed, Elena and Draven built their relationship slowly and deliberately, refusing to rush into patterns that might recreate the imbalance that had defined their previous years together. Draven made a point of including her in leadership discussions, valuing her perspective on pack matters that extended well beyond healing concerns. He learned, gradually, to notice and acknowledge the countless quiet contributions throughout the pack, ensuring that no one else would spend 9 years feeling invisible the way Elena once had. Their mate bond, once acknowledged and embraced by both parties, deepened naturally over time, built on the foundation of genuine respect and mutual understanding, rather than simply fate's undeniable pull. Elena found herself falling in love with the man Draven was becoming, distinct from the distant alpha she had loved from afar for 9 painful years. Grace watched their growing partnership with quiet satisfaction, occasionally reminding Draven, with the same directness that had characterized their earlier confrontations, that continued vigilance remained necessary. Change requires constant attention, she told him one afternoon, watching Elena instruct a group of young healing apprentices with the confidence and authority she had always deserved. It is easy to fall back into old patterns once the initial urgency fades. Do not allow that to happen. Draven nodded, understanding fully the weight of her warning. I do not intend to forget what 9 years of blindness cost us both. I see her now, Grace, clearly and completely, and I intend to make sure that clarity never fades, regardless of how comfortable or routine our life together eventually becomes. A year after her initial departure, Elena stood once again at the edge of the training field, though this time the circumstances could not have been more different. Rather than slipping away silently into darkness, she stood beside Draven as his acknowledged mate and partner, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, while pack members moved about their evening routines around them. Do you ever regret leaving? Draven asked quietly, his hand finding hers as they watched the colors shift and deepen. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. I regret the 9 years of silence that made leaving necessary, she said finally. But I do not regret the choice itself. Walking away taught me my own worth, in ways that simply waiting for you to notice me might never have accomplished. If I had stayed, hoping endlessly for recognition that might never have come, I would never have discovered the strength I possessed to build a life entirely my own. Draven squeezed her hand gently, understanding fully the truth in her words. Then perhaps that painful necessity ultimately served us both, difficult as those months of separation proved to be. Perhaps, Elena agreed, leaning into him with a comfort that had grown naturally over months of rebuilding trust and genuine partnership. Though I hope, moving forward, we will not require such painful lessons to remind us of what truly matters. Never again, Draven promised, and this time, Elena believed him completely, trusting the sustained change she had witnessed over months of careful observation, rather than simply accepting empty words, spoken in a moment of guilt-driven realization. As darkness settled fully over the territory, stars beginning to emerge across the clear night sky, Elena Voss stood beside the man who had finally, truly seen her, no longer the invisible healer who had loved faithfully in silence for 9 painful years, but a woman fully recognized and valued, building a future founded on genuine partnership rather than one-sided devotion. The 9 years of waiting had ended, not because she continued waiting long enough, but because she finally chose to walk away, and in that choice, discovered a strength and worth that no amount of continued silence could ever have revealed. And Draven, having finally learned to truly see the person standing quietly beside him all along, intended to spend the rest of his life ensuring she never again doubted the depth of that recognition.